This video is brought to you by mybookie.ag. Use our promo code ATMMA and MyBookie will match your deposit halfway up to $1,000. Simply play, win and get paid.
It's good to be back! UFC fans, it's good to be back! The king is home!
There are few things in the sport of mixed martial arts that excite fans as much as when a legend returns to action. And while serious injuries, mental fatigue and temporary retirement have been known to sideline a large number of fighters, they have also set the stage for some of the most anticipated returns in combat sport history. Over the years, we have seen several of the UFC's biggest stars blaze the comeback trail and create plenty of buzz by doing so. And now, with Conor McGregor making his UFC return at UFC 246, we thought it would be the perfect time to take a look back at some of the most anticipated returns we've seen in the UFC. As always, if you guys enjoy this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Now, without further ado, and ranked in no particular order, let's take a look at 10 of the most anticipated returns in UFC history. Number 10. Georges St-Pierre at UFC 217. Former welterweight champ Georges St-Pierre is widely regarded as one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time. Back in December of 2013, following a hard-fought victory over Johnny Hendricks at UFC 167, GSP shocked the MMA world by deciding to relinquish his welterweight strap and step away from the sport. However, when he was eventually offered the opportunity to fight Michael Bisping for the UFC middleweight belt, Georges St-Pierre couldn't help but accept the challenge. Given that GSP had never actually competed at middleweight and had been out of action for nearly 4 years, fans were dying to see how he would fare at a heavier weight class. The Canadian superstar made his highly anticipated return at UFC 217, going on to defeat Michael Bisping via a third-round submission. By doing so, he became just the 4th fighter to hold UFC championships in 2 divisions. Looking back to UFC 217, the pay-per-view itself performed quite well, with the buy rate listed at 875,000 buys. The future UFC Hall of Famer would go on to relinquish the middleweight title and officially retire in February of 2019. Number 9. DOMINICK CRUZ at UFC 178. Former 2-time UFC bantamweight champion DOMINICK CRUZ has dealt with more than his fair share of injuries over the years. In May of 2012, the California native tore his ACL while training and would suffer a series of setbacks on the road to recovery. Following the initial surgery, CRUZ's body rejected an ACL used from a cadaver, which meant he would need to go back under the knife. Fortunately, things went better the second time round, and having finally put his ACL issues behind him, CRUZ was scheduled to participate in a bantamweight championship unification bout with Renan Barão, with the fight being one of the huge talking points of UFC 169 in February of 2014. Unfortunately, CRUZ would suffer yet another excruciating injury, this time in the form of a torn groin. As a result, the unorthodox striker was forced to pull out of the fight and relinquish the UFC Bantamweight Championship. Finally, on September 27, 2014, after a nearly 3-year absence, DOMINICK CRUZ was ready to make his long-awaited return at UFC 178, taking on Japanese standout Takeya Mizugaki, who was in the midst of a 5-fight win streak. Despite the lengthy layoff, CRUZ silenced all the doubters, knocking out Mizugaki in just over a minute in perhaps the most impressive comeback performance the sport has ever seen. Number 8. Anderson Silva at UFC 183. Back in December of 2013, at UFC 168, Anderson the Spider Silva suffered a major setback during his rematch with Chris Weidman. While throwing a seemingly routine leg kick, Silva broke both his fibula and tibia, which resulted in one of the most graphic injuries ever seen on live television. For many fighters, such an injury would have marked the end of their MMA career. However, the shattered leg wasn't enough to stop the former middleweight champion of the world. In just over a year's time, Silva would step back into the cage with another MMA legend in Nick Diaz at UFC 183. The showdown between these two middleweight icons was a bout fans had been talking about for years. Despite the injury and the time off, Silva managed to win the contest by a unanimous decision. While the result was ultimately changed to a no contest due to Silva's post-fight drug results, the sheer fact that he even competed again after such a devastating injury is remarkable in itself. Number 7. Frank Mir at UFC 57. On September the 17th, 2004, UFC heavyweight champion Frank Mir was involved in a serious motorcycle accident. Although those who arrived on the scene feared the MMA star had perished, Mir would end up surviving the incident. Due to the injuries he suffered, which included tearing all the ligaments in his knee and a broken femur, the submission specialist was forced to vacate the title. After a fairly lengthy recovery period, Mir was ready to step back into the octagon at UFC 57, which took place on February the 4th, 2006. The former champ would end up getting TKO'd in the first round. But with that being said, the fact he was able to resume his career roughly a year and a half after suffering a near-fatal accident, well, it's nothing short of amazing. Mir would go on to become the interim UFC heavyweight champion and is still competing to this day. Number 6. Nate Diaz at UFC 241. After two memorable fights with Conor McGregor, Stockton, California's Nate Diaz had become a household name. However, much to the dismay of both the UFC and fight fans around the world, Diaz appeared to have little interest in resuming his career, following his second bout with McGregor in August of 2016. Fortunately, after nearly 3 years on the shelf, Dana White and company were finally able to get one of their top stars back into the cage. Diaz would make his triumphant return at UFC 241. His opponent for the event was former UFC lightweight champ Anthony Showtime Pettis. Upon his return, Diaz showed no signs of ring rust and dominated Showtime on his way to a unanimous decision victory. The win would set the stage for a showdown with Jorge Masvidal and a shot at the newly created BMF title, which took place last November. Number 5. Randy Couture at UFC 68. After losing the trilogy fight with Chuck Liddell at UFC 57, Randy the Natural Couture decided it was time to retire. However, as is often the case with professional mixed martial artists, the Natural couldn't resist the urge to step back into the cage. By the time Couture returned to action to face Tim Silva for the UFC Heavyweight Championship at UFC 68, he was 43 years old. In truth, the contest looked like a mismatch on paper. Silva was 7 inches taller and roughly 12 years younger than the Natural. Fortunately though for Couture, fights aren't contested on paper, and the 43-year-old used his superior grappling to dominate his younger opponent, beating him by a unanimous decision victory. In doing so, Couture would capture his 3rd UFC title, as he proved the old saying correct that age is just a number. Number 4. Conor McGregor at UFC 229. On October the 6th, 2018, the notorious Conor McGregor made his long-awaited return to the UFC octagon, as he faced off against bitter rival Khabib Nurmagomedov. Though he had participated in a boxing mega bout with Floyd Mayweather prior to UFC 229, the Irishman's last MMA fight was in November of 2016. Of course, the comeback aspect wasn't the only reason why this fight generated so much buzz. As most fans will recall, there was the infamous bus attack at the UFC 223 Media Day, in which the notorious one threw a dolly that shattered a window and injured multiple fighters. The incident made international headlines and set the stage for the most anticipated MMA fight of all time. Though Nurmagomedov spoiled his opponent's comeback party, the event was the most successful pay-per-view in the promotion's history, with UFC 229 selling a whopping 2.4 million buys. Number 3. Jon Jones at UFC 197. Jon Jones is yet another member of our list who is running for the title of the greatest fighter of all time. However, the reigning light heavyweight champ has also had his fair share of issues outside of the cage. Back in April of 2015, Jones was arrested on the felony charge of leaving the scene of an accident involving death or personal injury. The charge stemmed from an accident involving 3 cars, one of which was driven by a pregnant woman. In response, the UFC stripped Jones of his title and suspended him indefinitely. After around 6 months, the promotion decided to reinstate the troubled former champion. In his comeback fight, Jones took on Ovince Prue at UFC 197. MMA fans were eager to see how the star would perform following such a high-profile ordeal. While Jones looked a tad rusty, he still managed to defeat St. Preux via unanimous decision. Unfortunately for Jones, this would only be the first of several controversial comebacks. Number 2. Ronda Rousey at UFC 207. After suffering a shocking knockout loss to Holly Holm at UFC 193, Ronda Rousey decided to take just over a year out before her next bout. Prior to the Holm loss, Rousey was an undefeated fighter who looked unstoppable. Now that her era of invincibility was gone, MMA fans were dying to find out how she would respond to her next contest, which was against the current bantamweight champ Amanda Nunes. At UFC 207, a card dubbed The Comeback, Rousey was knocked out by Amanda Nunes just 38 seconds into the first round. It would end up being Ronda Rousey's final fight in the UFC. And while a great deal of the promotion leading up to the fight was centered around Rousey, it was Nunes who solidified herself as the queen of women's MMA. Number 1. Brock Lesnar at UFC 200. One of the biggest return fights in recent memory involved former UFC heavyweight champion and current WWE superstar Brock Lesnar. Following consecutive losses to Cain Velasquez and Alistair Overeem, Lesnar retired back in December of 2011. Well, at least that's what we thought. After spending a little less than 5 years in WWE, Lesnar decided to dust off his massive gloves and get back into the cage. He would return for one of the promotion's biggest events, UFC 200. His opponent was the hard-hitting Samoan knockout machine, Mark Hunt. Lesnar was able to out-wrestle Hunt for 3 rounds, and earned a decisive unanimous decision victory. However, after the fight, Lesnar tested positive for a banned substance known as clomiphene, and as a result of the infraction, the former NCAA wrestler's win was officially changed to a no contest. Infractions aside, Lesnar helped make UFC 200 a very lucrative endeavour, with a pay-per-view buy rate listed at over $1 million. Before we wrap up this video, we'd like to say a quick thank you to MyBookie for sponsoring this video. What's great is if you join right now, MyBookie will match your deposit halfway, all the way up to $1,000. For example, if you deposit $2,000, you'll receive an extra $1,000 in free money to play with. For those of you who are interested, be sure to check out the link provided below and use our promo code ATMMA. This will activate your offer. Simply play, win, and get paid. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next video.
Never have a doubt, do you like me now? Am I good enough now? Should I get more loud? Till you hear the fucking sound? Oh no, I'm losing my shit again, having the fit again. Man, I'm forgetting when I used to have some friends. I used to play pretend, we all grow up and then hating my phone and trends. I'm about to blow my head, nobody knows I'm dead. There I'm a ghost instead, think that I'm close, I get straight comatose in bed. Try to go slow with breath, breathe out my nose and head. Heart doesn't go the trend, faster it goes.